My brother was the family's golden child. I was still finding my way. At dinner, Dad boasted about his big promotion. I just grinned and said, "Crazy. I'm the one who owns the company that promoted him." My family thought they had me all figured out. They laughed, they pitied, they dismissed. But I never imagined their blindness, and my brother's pride, would nearly destroy everything I'd quietly built, and then some. That particular evening, the air in my parents' dining room was thick with the scent of roast chicken and too much celebration. I was at a dinner I hadn't wanted to attend, surrounded by familiar faces, all beaming, not at me, but at my younger brother, Owen. See, for most of my life, I was the other son. Not the golden child, not the prodigy who made the family group chat light up with praise every other week. That was Owen. 2 years younger, and our family's crown jewel, varsity football captain, Ivy League grad, fast-tracked through corporate promotions. My mother, Eleanor, practically considered him proof that good parenting paid off. Me? I was the kid who took apart old radios, failed a couple of college classes, and once ditched a master's program because it just didn't feel right. I'd heard "you'll figure it out eventually" more times than I could count, usually followed by a sigh or a pointed glance toward Owen. Even when I bought my first condo at 27, no help, no loans, the response was, "That's great, Ethan. So, when are you going to go back to school?" I'm not bitter about Owen's success. I don't hate him. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't carry this quiet, growing ball of resentment after 3 decades of being invisible, unless I was screwing something up. The truth was, I wasn't just figuring life out like they all assumed. I just never told them what I was really doing because every time I tried, someone would interrupt to ask about Owen's latest race or promotion. So, I stopped trying. And I started building. But we'll get there. This dinner, a few months ago, was another one for Owen. Senior vice president at some mid-size logistics company. I wasn't surprised, the man could sneeze at work, and HR would send him flowers. I knew exactly how the night would unfold: Eleanor's 3-course meal, Richard's, my dad's, scotch-fueled tales of Owen's Little League days, and Sarah tearfully declaring her pride. And me, sitting quietly at the end of the table, nursing a drink, pretending I wasn't tired of being background noise. But I went. I always go. I pulled into their driveway a little late, on purpose. The house hadn't changed, same blue siding, same ceramic angel, same wreath that proclaimed family is everything, a cosmic joke, really. Inside, the house buzzed. Eleanor gave me a distracted hug, already checking the roast. Owen was by the fireplace, whiskey in hand, surrounded by uncles and cousins, all grinning like they'd spotted a celebrity. "Ethan, you made it," he called, genuinely happy. And that's the thing about Owen. He's not a bad guy. Smart, charming, respectful. He never gloated. But somehow, that made it worse, because he didn't have to. Everyone else did it for him. Dinner started around 7:30. We gathered at the massive oak table, the one they only used for holidays or events important enough to make me wear a collared shirt. Good china, name cards for heaven's sake. Owen, of course, was at Richard's right hand. I was 3 seats down on the left, next to cousin Chloe, who was glued to her phone. The food was great. I sipped my wine, trying to tune out conversations about quarterly bonuses and stock options. Then, halfway through, Richard cleared his throat. Ahem. "Everyone, if I could just have your attention." The room quieted. "I just want to say how incredibly proud I am of my son, Owen." He clapped Owen on the back. "Promoted to senior VP at only 31. That's not just success, that's leadership. That's legacy." Everyone clapped, glasses clinked. Eleanor dabbed her eyes. "He's always been driven," Richard continued. "Remember that model airplane he built in 8th grade? I told you then he was going places." I almost laughed. Owen didn't build that plane. I did. He painted it. But whatever. It didn't matter. And now, Richard said, raising his glass, he's not just working at the company. He's shaping it, helping it grow, moving it forward. I smiled tightly, taking another sip of wine. My hands were shaking a little. Not from anger, just exhaustion. The kind you feel when you've been holding in 1,000 words for a decade. And the best part, Richard grinned, his CEO said he's on track for even more. Said he's one of the smartest people they've hired in years. Isn't that right, Owen? Owen chuckled modestly. I guess so. That's what she told me. I put my glass down. Slowly. Deliberately. Funny, I thought. That she he was referring to. Yeah, that would be me. I hadn't told them. Not once. They knew I ran a small business, but never asked for details. I'd started that logistics company 6 years ago with a silent partner and a whole lot of sleepless nights. After 3 years of grinding, we merged with a mid-tier player, and I became the largest shareholder. Last year, I bought out the co-founder and stepped in as acting CEO. And yes, Owen had been working there for nearly 2 years. Applied through standard channels, got the job on his own merits. Ironically, he didn't even know I owned it. I kept it that way for a reason. But that night, something shifted. It was the way Richard said legacy, like it belonged exclusively to Owen. Like the rest of us were just extras in his heroic tale. Like I hadn't spent years sacrificing vacations, weekends, peace of mind to build something from nothing. Something that now had over 150 employees and contracts across 3 states. Something my own brother now helped manage. I looked around the table. Everyone was nodding, smiling, raising glasses. And I felt it again, that slow, choking sensation of being erased while sitting right there. So, I smiled. I didn't say it then. Not yet. That would have been too easy. Instead, I let the silence hum for a second too long. Just enough to make Richard glance at me, eyebrow raised. You've been awfully quiet, Ethan, he said, voice light but pointed. Still figuring life out? The words landed like a slap. The old joke. The same one they'd used at Thanksgiving, at Cousin Chloe's wedding, at the last barbecue when I showed up late from a business trip and they assumed I'd been job hunting. Everyone chuckled. Even Owen winced a little. And I just smiled. Because that was the moment I knew. The moment I decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. Not at the next dinner. Not the next time they talked about legacy. Not the next time someone clapped Owen on the back for a company he didn't even know I owned. No, the next time I'd speak. And when I did, I'd make sure they'd remember it. But before that moment came, something else happened. Something I hadn't expected. And it started just 3 days later with an email Owen was never supposed to see. And that's when everything began to unravel. I didn't sleep much after that dinner. It wasn't the food or the wine. It was that look Richard gave me. That still figuring life out line. It stuck with me like a splinter, not painful at first, but irritating, constant. Something you can't stop touching. And the worst part? That wasn't even the first time he'd said it. He said it when I turned 30 and didn't want a party. Said it when I told them I was working on something big, and they laughed like it was a phase. He even said it when I bought a new car, paid in full, and he muttered, must have gotten a good deal, huh? It's weird how your own family can clip your wings while smiling at the dinner table. For the next few days, I buried myself in work. Meetings to prep for, quarterly reports, a new distribution hub in Ohio that needed final sign-off. Normally, I love the chaos, but that week it felt heavier, like I was dragging chains behind me. Then, Thursday morning, Owen forwarded an internal email to our company group chat. Owen Harrison, hey team, anyone know who this Monroe is CC'd on these board updates? I don't think I've met them, but their name keeps popping up. I froze. Monroe was me. Ethan Monroe. It was the name I used in our private equity documents, the one listed under CEO on our confidential board-facing reports. On purpose, I kept it separate from the public org chart. To everyone else, the face of the company was Julian and Nora, our public-facing co-founders, and damn good ones. I never thought Owen would go poking around in board updates. Honestly, I didn't think he cared enough to notice. But he did now. Before I could even draft a response, someone replied in the chat. Elena, legal, that's the CEO. I thought you already met him. Owen's next message was quick. Owen Harrison, wait. Ethan? A pause. Elena, yes. I stared at the screen. My phone buzzed. It was Owen. I let it ring. A minute later, a text, Owen, is this real? And then another, Owen, you're the CEO? I didn't answer. I needed time to think. Not because I was scared, but because I could already hear the storm gathering. It only took 6 hours for the news to hit the rest of my family. At 8:07 p.m., Eleanor called. Why didn't you tell us? She asked, voice trembling, not with awe, but with something closer to accusation. Because you never asked, I replied. She sputtered. That's ridiculous. Of course, Ethan, this isn't some little side hustle. You're running a company. Your brother works for you. Yeah, and he earned that job. I didn't hand it to him. That's not the point, she snapped. We had a right to know. A right? I laughed softly. Since when did I owe you my resume? You don't have to be sarcastic. Your father's going to be very disappointed. Ah, there it was. Disappointed. Not proud. Not surprised. Not even curious. Just disappointed. The next day, Richard called. I didn't pick up. Then came the emails. The family group chat lit up like it hadn't in years. Only now, I was the topic. Uncle David, damn, Ethan, you've been holding out on us. Aunt Sarah, so proud of you, sweetie. But why the secrecy? Eleanor, we'll talk about this Sunday. Don't be late. Richard, need to understand what this means. We need clarity. We need clarity, like I was a boardroom risk instead of a son. Owen, though, he didn't say anything. Not until Sunday. That's when it broke. We were all back at my parents' place, because of course we were. Eleanor couldn't not host a Sunday dinner, even in the middle of a Category 5 family hurricane. I showed up last again, on purpose. They were already seated. Owen on the far side of the table, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Eleanor handed me a plate of roast beef like nothing had happened. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years and 4 days. No one said anything for a while. We just chewed. Finally, Owen put down his fork. So, he said, looking directly at me. You're my boss. The words hit like a slap. I kept my tone calm. Technically, no. I don't micromanage the sales department. But you own the company, he said, sharper this time. You signed my promotion. No, I corrected him. I didn't. Your regional VP and our HR director did. I didn't even know about it until afterward. He scoffed. Sure. Richard leaned forward. Ethan, why keep it a secret from your own family? I looked at all of them. Eleanor with her tightly pursed lips. Richard with his furrowed brow. Owen practically vibrating across the table. And I felt something shift inside me, like something had finally snapped loose. Because you never saw me, I said quietly. Not really. You saw failure. Or confusion. Or disappointment. You never asked what I was building. You just assumed I wasn't building anything worth talking about. That's not fair, Eleanor said. It is, I said. It's exactly fair. Owen spoke again, voice rising. You know what this looks like, right? Like you played us. Like you let me grovel for that promotion while you sat on top and watched. I didn't know you were applying for it, I said firmly. I'm not in your chain of command, Owen. And I never treated you differently. I made sure of it. But you could have, he said bitterly. You could have crushed my chances or fast-tracked me. Either way, you had the power. And I didn't use it, I said. Because I didn't want you to feel like I got you where you are. I respected you too much for that. He pushed his chair back. Well, thanks for the respect, I guess. Then he left. Just like that. Dinner kind of fizzled after that. Richard muttered something about timing and honesty while stabbing his green beans. Eleanor cleared plates with more force than necessary. I stayed until dessert, then left without saying goodbye. I wish that had been the worst of it. But 3 days later, I got an email from HR. Owen had filed a formal complaint against me. Alleged undisclosed conflicts of interest, favoritism, and nepotistic hiring practices. He cited emails I'd sent him, basic logistical stuff, nothing personal, as examples of manipulative influence. Said it created a hostile dynamic that undermined his professional integrity. I sat at my desk staring at the complaint for a long time. I didn't feel angry. I felt hollow. This wasn't just petty sibling rivalry anymore. This was a betrayal, cold, calculated, weaponized through the very company I'd built to escape that kind of family chaos. I called our legal team. They said they'd handle it. But the message was clear. Owen didn't just want distance. He wanted blood. He wanted to hurt me. And it worked, at least for a while. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I'd done something to cause this. If maybe keeping the secret had been cruel. If maybe I'd underestimated just how deep the favoritism had rooted itself, not just in our parents, but in him. Then came the worst blow. A week later, I was pulled into a board meeting. Not unusual. What was unusual were the 2 items at the top of the agenda: CEO conflict of interest disclosure and leadership confidence vote. Apparently, someone had reached out to 2 of our external board members and forwarded them Owen's complaint. And just like that, the company I had built, the one I had bled for, was now holding a vote on whether I was fit to lead it. That night, I didn't sleep at all. Because I knew this wasn't just about a company. This was about legacy. This was about a brother so used to being the pride of the family that he couldn't stomach the idea that I had built something bigger, something real, without him. And now he was trying to burn it all down. But what he didn't realize was that I'd been underestimated my entire life. And I'd learned exactly how to turn that into a weapon. So when I walked into that boardroom, I had a plan. One that would take everything Owen thought he knew and flip it upside down. One that would expose not just his lies, but the shaky foundation they stood on. And one that would make sure the next family dinner would never be the same again. I didn't walk into that boardroom to fight. Not at first. I walked in wearing a navy blue blazer, no tie, and a look I practiced in the mirror for 2 hours the night before, calm, collected, empty of rage, but full of resolve. If you looked closely, you might have noticed the fine tremble in my hands, but no one looked closely. No one ever had. The board members were already seated. 8 people, 2 on Zoom, 6 in person. Some had been with me from the beginning. Others were newer, brought in after the merger. Investors, lawyers, advisors, all sharp, all watching me now with that unreadable corporate gaze. The chair, a woman named Brenda, who'd always backed me, gave a polite nod. Ethan, thanks for coming. I nodded back. Of course. We got through the legal formalities quickly: roll call, disclosure of voting members, acknowledgement of the complaint. Brenda looked at me. Before we proceed to deliberation, would you like to respond? I stood, straightened my jacket, took a breath I didn't know I was holding. Yes, I would. I didn't have slides. I didn't have graphs. What I had was the truth. And I told it. I told them how I'd started the company 6 years ago from a studio apartment, eating frozen burritos and cold brew, emailing prospective clients until 3 a.m. How I went 2 years without a paycheck. How I landed our first warehouse contract by driving across the state myself in a borrowed car and presenting a logistics model I designed on the back of a pizza box. How I'd grown the company from 3 employees to 154, negotiated a merger, kept us profitable through a pandemic, and retained 91% of our staff during a volatile market year. I told them I'd made mistakes, but none of them unethical. That I'd kept my name out of the org chart on purpose to avoid influencing internal decisions. That Owen had applied like anyone else, that I'd recused myself from every panel or promotion vote involving him. I didn't want to be a brother, I said, looking directly at the Zoom camera. I wanted to be a builder, and I wanted every person here to know they earned their place, including Owen. Silence. I finished with one last sentence: if the mistake I made was staying quiet while I worked, then I'll own that. But I will not apologize for what I built. Brenda stared at me for a long moment. Then she nodded once. The board deliberated for 37 minutes. I waited in the hallway with a paper cup of stale coffee and a mind racing with every version of failure I could imagine. When they called me back in, I stood tall, prepared for anything. Brenda smiled, barely. The vote is 7-1. You retain your position. Relief didn't hit me like a wave. It trickled in slowly, like sunlight through blinds. I nodded, thanked them, and left. But the damage was done. Owen didn't show up to work the next day, or the day after that. On Friday, HR informed me he'd submitted a formal resignation, effective immediately. No explanation, no goodbye. Just an auto-generated exit form and a company laptop left in the mailroom. I stared at the email for a long time, not because I missed him, but because I didn't. And that broke something inside me more than I expected. Because as much as I'd resented him, as much as he'd tried to tear me down, I'd wanted to fix things. Somewhere deep down, I'd hoped this could have been the turning point, a reset, a moment to see each other not as rivals, but as men who could finally stand on even ground. But Owen didn't want that. He wanted the pedestal. And if he couldn't have it, he'd rather burn the whole house down. I went home that night and sat in the dark for a long time. No music, no TV, just the hum of the fridge and the occasional car outside. For the first time in years, I didn't know what came next. The company was safe. But I wasn't. Something had shifted in me. Something permanent. Like I'd finally looked in the mirror and seen every scar, every ignored milestone, every time someone cut me off mid-sentence to ask about Owen, and realized I'd let it all happen. I'd accepted being invisible, and now I had to figure out who I was when I wasn't. The next few weeks passed in a blur. I kept my head down at work, focused on operations, had lunch with my department heads, visited our warehouses, spoke at a logistics conference in Denver, and was approached afterward by a kid with a notebook full of questions. He said he wanted to be like me someday. I didn't know what to say. I smiled, signed his notebook, told him to stay curious, but something inside me still felt off. At home, I started therapy. First session, I walked in with arms crossed, ready to talk about work stress. By the third session, I was talking about Owen, about Richard, about the Christmas where I got a used iPod and Owen got a new laptop, and how I told myself I didn't care. About the college graduation where Richard took photos with Owen for 30 minutes and forgot to take a single one with me. About how I'd never once heard my father say, "I'm proud of you." The therapist just listened, then asked, "Have you ever said it to yourself?" I didn't answer, but that question haunted me for days. I started taking weekends off for the first time in 6 years. I rested, not just physically, but mentally. I read novels, cooked pasta from scratch, drove with the windows down and no destination in mind. I took a pottery class, of all things, and made a mug that cracked in the kiln but still held water. It felt symbolic. I also started saying no to meetings that didn't need me. To investors who wanted to micromanage. To family invites that came packaged in obligation. When Eleanor texted, "Family barbecue this Saturday. Everyone's coming. Don't be late." I stared at the screen for 5 minutes. Then I wrote, "Thanks, but I've got other plans. Maybe next time." She sent a thumbs up emoji. That was it. I didn't feel guilty. For once, I felt free. But the biggest shift came 2 months later, on a random Tuesday. I was at the office finalizing a new warehouse lease when Elena from legal knocked on my door. "There's someone here to see you," she said, eyes uncertain. "Family?" I frowned. "Eleanor?" She shook her head. "Owen." I stood up before I knew why. He was in the lobby wearing jeans and a jacket I hadn't seen before. His face looked thinner, eyes tired. He smiled when he saw me, but it was tentative, like someone approaching a skittish dog. "Hey," he said. "Hey, can we talk?" I led him into an empty conference room. He sat. I didn't. He looked up at me. "I'm sorry." I waited. No point jumping in now. "I was angry," he said, "and hurt. And jealous, I guess." He laughed bitterly. "Not that I have a right to be. You built something amazing, and I tried to turn it against you. That's messed up." I crossed my arms. "Why?" He shrugged. "Because I didn't know who I was without being the guy who's doing better than his brother." He looked at the table. I told myself I worked hard, that I earned everything. But deep down, I always knew the road was easier because of how people saw me. Because of how they saw you. Silence. "I thought if I made you look smaller, I'd feel taller," he said quietly. But all I did was prove how small I was. I didn't say anything. "Not yet." "I'm not asking for a job or forgiveness," he added. I needed you to hear it from me before you heard it from someone else." I finally sat. "Why now?" I asked. He exhaled. "Because I've been doing what you did. Building something from scratch. No handouts. It sucks." He smiled. "But it's also good, in a way. I get it now. Why you kept it quiet. Why it mattered." He looked at me. I'm not the only one who changed after that dinner. I stared at him for a long moment. Then I nodded just once. We didn't hug. We didn't cry. We just sat there in the silence as two brothers who had finally taken off the masks. That was the first day we started rebuilding. Not as golden boy and black sheep. Not as CEO and complaint. But as equals. As men. The dinner table had changed. But so had I. And I had no intention of ever going back to being unseen. The thing about rebuilding is it's not always clean. Some parts heal smoothly, sure, like talking to Owen again. That didn't fix everything overnight, but we'd finally gotten past the part where we saw each other as competition. We met for coffee twice that month. No tension, no scorekeeping. We talked about work, about life. I found out he'd been consulting for a startup in Denver. He didn't mention our parents once. That should have tipped me off. Because 2 weeks after our second coffee, Eleanor called. Not to catch up, not to ask how I was doing. She was calling with an announcement. We've decided to make some changes to the will, she said. I blinked. Okay. We just want everything to be fair, Ethan. You understand, right? That's how she phrased it. Like a warning dressed up as diplomacy. I sat down at my kitchen counter, suddenly cold all over. What kind of changes? Well, she said, her voice shifting into that mom-explaining we can't have the toy tone, since Owen is taking a bit of a step back professionally, and you're obviously doing very well, we thought it might make sense for you to take less from the estate. You don't need it the way he does. I didn't speak for a moment. Then I asked, did Owen ask you to do this? No, he doesn't even know yet. She laughed lightly, like this was all so reasonable. But come on, Ethan. You're the CEO of a company. You're set for life. I felt my jaw tighten. And the house? I asked, already knowing. Silence. Then, well, yes. We're putting Owen on the deed now, just in case anything happens. You know how paperwork can get messy. I stared at the wall. I could hear Richard in the background fiddling with something in the garage. Probably the same workbench he'd built for Owen in high school. The same one I wasn't allowed to touch. Let me get this straight, I said, keeping my voice steady. You're giving Owen the house and a bigger share of the estate because I'm doing better. It's not about taking anything from you, she said. It's about helping your brother. The irony stung. They hadn't lifted a finger to help me when I was living on microwave noodles and pitching investors from a folding chair in a rental closet. But now that I was stable, thriving even, they wanted to balance the scales. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't beg. I just said, I think you should talk to a lawyer before you do anything. And then I hung up. For a moment, I thought that would be the end of it. Maybe a scare, enough to make them pause. It wasn't. The following week, I got a notice from the county clerk's office. The deed transfer had gone through. Owen's name was now co-listed on my childhood home. The same home I had helped repair after a storm when I was 23. The one I had helped refinance when they were struggling during the recession. The one I'd offered to buy outright when they flirted with foreclosure. They never accepted that offer. Said it would be weird if their unemployed son owned the house. And now? Now that I owned a multi-million-dollar business, they handed it to my brother. No conversation, no warning, just a legal document with a notary seal and the last name Harrison right where mine used to be. That was when something in me snapped. Not in a dramatic, table-flipping way. Not even in anger. Just a quiet internal shift, a realization. I was done trying to prove anything. They had made their choice, again. But this time, I had something they didn't expect. Power. Not just money or influence, but leverage. The kind you only get after years of being underestimated. After being ignored, written off, talked over. I started making calls that night. The first one was to my lawyer, Sophia. She'd helped me structure the company during the merger. She was sharp, discreet, and had an excellent memory. I told her I wanted to set up a private holding company, something quiet, separate from my name, the kind of entity that didn't draw attention, but had full purchasing power. She didn't ask why. She just got to work. The second call was to a friend from college, Marcus. We'd reconnected at a tech conference a year ago. What my parents didn't know, because they never asked, was that Marcus ran a boutique real estate fund. He also happened to specialize in acquiring distressed properties from aging homeowners who needed liquidity but didn't want to downsize. Off-market deals? He asked. Exactly, I said. I want everything quiet. No public listings, no family names on paperwork. You planning to flip? I smiled faintly. Not exactly. I spent the next 6 weeks laying the groundwork. I acquired 3 properties in the same neighborhood as my parents' house. 2 rental homes and 1 vacant lot 2 doors down. All purchased under my new holding company. No one knew it was me. I paid in cash, closed fast, and kept the original tenants with small rent reductions. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I just wanted proximity. Leverage. Meanwhile, I asked Sophia to prepare an asset purchase agreement for a very specific, very sentimental property my parents owned, a lake cabin they inherited from my grandfather. They never used it. I had spent one summer there as a kid. Owen didn't like it, too many bugs, no internet. But I remembered the creaky dock and the quiet mornings. It was one of the only places I remembered feeling at peace as a child. I made an offer through a shell buyer, well above market value. They accepted in 3 days. They never asked who bought it. A week later, I had a renovation team on site replacing the roof, fixing the deck, installing solar panels. It wasn't revenge. Not yet. It was reclamation. A few weeks later, Owen texted me. Owen, did you buy the cabin? Me, why do you ask, Owen? Owen, because Eleanor's freaking out. Said someone bought it from under them. Offered 3x what it's worth. Me, huh? Must have really wanted it. He didn't press. Not then. Meanwhile, my parents kept sending family group texts, birthday reminders, pictures of their garden, a link to an article Richard wrote for his church newsletter where he described Owen as the heart and future of our family. I didn't respond, but I kept watching. I found out my parents had taken out a small line of credit against the house, my house, the one Owen now partially owned. I found out Owen had moved in temporarily while figuring things out. According to Cousin Brooke, I found out Richard had been telling neighbors he planned to renovate the garage into an in-law suite to help Owen get back on his feet. None of them knew that the company I built, the one I'd nearly lost because of that same brother, had doubled in valuation since the board vote. We were expanding again. National contracts, warehouse hubs in 3 new states. And I had an opportunity, one I hadn't planned for. A large-scale logistics client, huge, national, steady, needed a custom warehouse facility in our hometown, close to major interstates, easy truck access, and they were willing to sign a multi-year lease if we could break ground before winter. I knew the perfect lot, the vacant one, 2 doors down from my parents, the one I already owned. So, I started planning. The city needed to approve zoning. The neighborhood needed to be informed. Public notices would go out. There'd be flyers, meetings. And if all went according to plan, I'd be developing a 200,000 square foot facility within shouting distance of my childhood front porch. No one would know it was mine until it was too late. But even that wasn't the end game. That was just the signal. The real move, the real setup, was what I'd found in the fine print of the deed transfer between my parents and Owen. A clause buried deep, but legally binding. And it gave me the opening I'd been waiting for. Not just to confront them, but to take back everything they thought they could hand away behind closed doors. Because they'd made one mistake. They forgot who they were dealing with. Not the black sheep, not the disappointment, not the kids still figuring life out. No, they were dealing with the man who built an empire while they weren't watching. And now I was watching them, and I was done being polite. The zoning meeting was scheduled for 6 p.m. at the local community center, same beige building where I'd once failed a 5th grade science fair because my baking soda volcano tipped over. Funny how things come full circle. The week before, the city mailed out those generic white notices, community notice of proposed commercial development. Neighbors started murmuring. A few even showed up at the property to read the temporary signs staked in the ground. One of them, Mr. Jenkins, used to mow our lawn back when I was 12. He took a photo of the rendering on the flyer and posted it in the neighborhood Facebook group. That's when it reached my parents, and more importantly, Owen. At 9:17 that night, I got a text from my brother. Owen, tell me you're not building a warehouse 2 doors down from Eleanor and Richard. Me, you sure you want to know the answer? Owen, Ethan, what the hell is this? Me, business. He didn't reply after that. But the next morning, I got a call from Eleanor. I let it go to voicemail. Then I got one from Richard, then Aunt Sarah, then Eleanor again. Finally, I picked up on the third call from a number I didn't recognize. Ethan Monroe, I answered. Eleanor's voice snapped back. Don't you dare pretend you don't know who this is. I wasn't pretending. Just wasn't sure which member of the family was calling to yell at me next. She ignored that. How could you do this? You're going to destroy our home. That lot is part of our neighborhood. You think a warehouse belongs here? I kept my voice flat. Funny. You didn't seem to care much about what belonged to me when you handed the house to Owen without telling me. That's different. No, I said. It's really not. She faltered. This isn't about punishment, I continued. It's business. The city's desperate for jobs. The logistics partner is legitimate. It'll bring in new tax revenue, contracts, and infrastructure upgrades. Don't give me that politician answer, she hissed. You're doing this to make a point. I already made my point, I said. Now, I'm just building what I need to build. She hung up. But I wasn't done, because here's where it all came together. The clause I'd found buried in the deed transfer between my parents and Owen was simple but legally powerful. In exchange for Owen being added to the title, he agreed to assume partial liability for all property-related debts, liens, and encumbrances attached to the estate. When my parents took out that line of credit against the house, it triggered a contingency. If the lien holder demanded repayment or refinance, both title holders, including Owen, would be held jointly responsible. And that's exactly what I did next. I bought the debt quietly, legally, through a shell company. Then, through counsel, I notified Owen and my parents that the credit line was being called in. Full repayment due in 45 days, or foreclosure proceedings would begin. Panic set in immediately. Owen called again, this time less furious and more cornered. Ethan, he said, you can't do this. I already did. They don't have that kind of money. Then maybe they shouldn't have taken out a loan on a house they planned to give away, I said. Maybe you shouldn't have signed a document you didn't read. You're trying to make them homeless. No, I said. I'm trying to make a point you all finally have to listen to. By showing them what it feels like to be treated like a variable, like a liability. Like someone who doesn't count because they're doing fine on their own. He went quiet. I added, I'm not taking the house. I'm offering a buyout below market value, cash. Enough for them to relocate, pay off their debts, and have something left over. And if they don't accept, then the foreclosure moves forward legally, publicly, and you, as co-owner, will have to explain why your name's on it. Owen didn't speak for nearly a full minute. Then he said, You've changed. No, I said. I've just stopped hiding. The next 2 weeks were chaos behind the scenes. Meetings, legal paperwork. My parents hired a lawyer who quickly confirmed the clause was airtight. Owen tried to contest the debt transfer, but the documents were clean. Every I dotted, every T crossed. In the end, they took the buyout. They moved to a smaller place about 30 minutes away. A gated community with beige houses, manicured lawns, and HOA newsletters about raccoon sightings. The house I grew up in? I didn't keep it. I donated it to a local nonprofit that converts residential homes into transitional housing for single parents. Let that sink in. The place that was never safe for me, never a place I was seen, became a haven for someone else. A place where someone rebuilding their life could finally breathe. I didn't announce it. Didn't post about it. Didn't need a plaque. But word got around, and eventually it reached them. One Sunday, a month after the warehouse broke ground, I got an email from Richard. It was short. Subject: I was wrong. Body: I see it now. All of it. I wish I'd listened sooner. I wish I'd asked. But more than that, I wish I had seen you. Richard. I didn't reply. Not out of anger. Out of peace. The cycle was over. And Owen? He stayed quiet. Moved out west. I heard through the grapevine he was working at a mid-sized firm again. No fanfare, no press releases. Just a man starting over, hopefully for the better. I saw him once more, months later, at a funeral for a distant relative. We shook hands. No grudge, no smile. Just a silent nod of acknowledgement between two men who had burned the bridge and swam the river. And me? I kept building. The warehouse finished on time. The company expanded. I visited the cabin every fall, made coffee on the dock, and watched the sun rise through orange leaves. It became mine again. Not just legally, but emotionally. A symbol of what I'd taken back and what I'd let go of. They don't invite me to family dinners anymore. But that's okay, because the legacy they denied me, I created my own, and it stands taller than the house they gave away. I don't need their seat at the table. I built my own. And I had the final toast. What would you have done if your own family tried to erase you?